Hello explorers and welcome to another video. Today we are going to talk about Java 15. And Java 15 is going to be released the 15th of September, and now it's in its final first ramp down phase. So they have finalized what's going to be in this release. No new features will enter, just bug fixes. So now we can talk about what's in this release. And I have given this release the nickname Unsafe Garbage not because it's a garbage release or anything like that. It's because we have some unsafe functions that will be removed, something that you as a Java developer should not use. So they are deprecated, and we also have some garbage collection routines in this release, and we're going to go through all the different points that are in this release, and I will have some opinions about them. So first off, we talk about Edvard Curves digital signature algorithm. Yep, 339. And this is a curve algorithm, as the name says. Usually when you have some algorithm, you do a different steps, you XOR some values, and you have some mathematical function that goes through and gives you the result. And usually you can have one key, and then you have a private and a public key, or you have a hidden key, and then you just use that in XOR and so on. And there are a lot of different functions to actually get this specific key and so on. And this new algorithm is a bit interesting. Edvard Curves had been used in different crypto libraries for a while now, but the functionality is ingenious and pretty simple to explain actually. If you have a curve which actually comes from some parameters that tells you how this curve should look, and you take one point in the curve and then draw a straight line through until you hit another point in that curve, it's pretty much impossible, if you don't know the parameters of the curve, to know that if I am at this point, where am I gonna end up in the next point? So that's the Edvard Curves algorithm, and it's gonna be implemented in Java. So it's native Java code and a native function in Java. There have been libraries that has done this using C libraries and have GNI interfaces and so on, but now you have a native Edvard Curves digital signature algorithm in Java. So that's nice. Next up, we have sealed classes. And this is pretty much if you have some developer that has a class and he writes a specific implementation for that interface, whatever it is, and then he thinks that, okay, I will write some implementations of this, and I don't want anyone else to use this, so you can't implement anything else than the classes that I implement. So in this case, we have a shape, and it can only be a circle, a rectangle, or a square. And if you are implementing any other class, it's not allowed. This is my class. So it could actually just be a private class or a protected class or anything like that. But this makes it even more devious, because if it's protected, you can use the same package space and actually reuse this thing. If it's private, you're screwed. You can't use that class. But in this case, you don't permit people to reuse your code. Could be good in some implementations, but for open source, it's pretty much useless. It's my opinion, probably not your opinion. Next up, we have hidden classes. And hidden classes are classes that could be used by a specific library using reflection, but they are not visible for other people to use. So it's the same thing goes there. It's not that usable for open source, but I can see some implementations where you want some things that you want to use in your code. You want to find it using reflection because you have a service, for instance, that you want to hook up, and depending on which libraries you have in your package hierarchy, you want different sealed hidden classes to be invoked in order to serve a specific function. I don't know if this actually adds anything to the language, but it's there if you want to use it. Next up, we have the NashHome JavaScript engine. And I didn't know that we actually have a JavaScript engine in the JVM. There are libraries that solve this problem, but I'm pretty sure that a colleague of mine in the job that I had before the one that I have now actually used this, because he was stumped that there was a JavaScript engine that you can use in order to implement things in JavaScript. So he wrote some things and wanted to transform some values and just use this JavaScript engine to run his code and evaluate it, which is pretty interesting. But there is not that many cases where you actually use this engine, and it's not something that you actually need to have in the API because it's very, very specific and not that widely used by the community. So it was deprecated a few versions before, and now it's removed in this release. So now we don't have a JavaScript engine in the API anymore. Next up, we have the legacy Datagram Socket. And this is something that is beneath all the different functions you use to connect to different services and so on. So this is a very old API that was a bit hard to use. Not that many people actually use this, but there are a lot of things that implement and use this as their ground plate or their interface to the actual implementation on, let's say, a network card and so on. So this was a bad API or a very old API, so it's rewritten and easier to use and easier to handle, and it's also more performant. So it was something that I needed to look into and implement, and it's now in Java 15. So now we have a more performant and a better version of the Datagram Socket API, which is pretty nice because that means that all our network traffic will probably be a bit faster. Next up, we have the biased locking. And biased locking was a thing that you implemented in Java before in order to give a specific thread responsibility for a lock. So a specific thread was biased for that lock and hold that lock, which meant that it was a more performant way to handle locking. But because our systems have evolved, we have more CPUs and more resources, this is not required anymore. There are other locking mechanisms that works as well as the bias locking, so it's disabled and deprecated in this version and will be removed in future versions. Next up, we have the matching, pattern matching using instance of, and it's the second preview. So if you have some function that you probably written before where you have an object and looks for the instance of string, and then inside of the if statement you use that string by casting it from an object to a string. You can actually use this by just adding an annotation for the instance of, and when you actually get a hit for this if statement, you also get the variable, so you can use it directly. You don't have to cast it afterwards. So that makes the code a bit more condensed and easier to read and think about. And this preview, I talked a lot more about this in the Java 14 video, so you can go back to that one and listen to the explanation there, and I have more examples in that video as well. Next up, we have Chinois, the low pause time garbage collection. So it's not instantaneous, it's just low pause time. And this is something that is implemented in the OpenJDK. It's not in the Oracle JDK. They have not allowed it in there, but it's trying to create something that uses the power of your machine and the excess threads that you have in order to garbage collect on another thread, so it will not impact your system. And then when it has garbage collected and everything is released on that end, it will do a short pause time, about 10 milliseconds, and release that memory from the running thread. So this will make the system more responsive, but it will handle however large areas that you have at all. So if you have, for instance, 200 terabytes, it should be available for this function to use in this manner. And you just have 10 milliseconds where you actually need to shut down the process, do the last steps of the garbage collections, and then you can continue running. Next up, we have ZGZ, a scalable low latency garbage collector. And this has a little bit more restrictions and a little bit more functions. So it's restricted to 4 terabytes, and in this release 16 terabytes. So they have added a bit more to it. But it has a very low latency garbage collector because it uses other threads and only have 2 milliseconds of actual garbage collection on the main thread. So it's very low, but it is restricted to Windows, Mac, and Linux. And it also has other features than the Chinois. It can unload classes on the fly and so on. So it will actually shrink the heap size after the garbage collection. But as it has some restrictions on the memory size, they are different but very similar. Next up, we are talking about text blocks, the JEP 378. We have seen this before, but now it actually is going into this version. It's not a preview anymore. So in this version, you should be able to use the text blocks as they are notated here with double quotes, 3 double quotes, and then you have some text, and you can have them on multiple lines, and you can also use the \s notation to actually say that you want spaces to be left in the input. And if you write things in this way, where you actually have them aligned on the left hand side in a line, you will have the text block in one line with not any extra spaces. But if you change the alignment, you will have more spaces and so on. So there were a lot of things that I had to actually think about when they implement this. And there is some things you need to get used to. So try text blocks out and figure out how to actually use them. There are a lot of good documentation on this, but it's so nice to see that it's finally here in the Java 15 release. And I can see multiple places where this can be very useful for your implementation. Next up, we have something that is not that big of a deal. We have some code in the Java engine that makes it support Solaris and Sparks. And Spark and Solaris is systems that are still used today, but they are not that common like they were in the 80s. Or in the 90s at least. I have used Solaris machines and also Spark machines. So they are not that common anymore, and it was actually a lot of work to maintain these ports. So now they have been removed. They were deprecated earlier. Now they have been removed from the Java 15 release. Next up, we have Foreign Memory Access API. And this is usually implemented by JNI and some code that is written in C, for instance, to actually take large memory blocks and handle a specific memory area, or if you want to talk to the graphics engine, if you are doing, for instance, machine learning, you might want to just send a large amount of memory into the graphics memory and so on. And this was not really possible before to do in Java in a safe manner. But with this new API, they are looking into how could you be able to actually write and read memory as a block in a safe manner. So this is the second incubator, so it's not ready for prime time, but they have it in the Java engine, so you can try it out behind the flag. but they are still working hard on this, and it will probably not see the daylight in the next release, perhaps the release after that. But it's still a very interesting concept. If you are doing machine learning as I do in Java, it could actually open up more opportunities for training your models in Java. So I'm looking forward to see where this goes. Next up, we have records. And this is the second preview, so it's not ready for prime time yet, but it's very close. Perhaps it's in the next release. And records are just data types where you can put in some variables, for instance, in this case, X and Y, into a record, and you will get equals, you will get hash maps, you will get compares, and you will have constructors and getters. So this is a complete package of some data record that you can use in your implementations. Next up, we have the RMI Activation. And this is a concept that is used in different servers like the Hotspots VM or in some application servers, where you activate some class in the running VM that should be running in that VM that you can talk to and send commands and run things against, but it will not die with your process. It's something that is in the JVM and running all the time. And the JVM will actually look into it and hold it running as well. So if an activated class dies, the JVM will restart it. So it's kind of a service thing, but it's not that useful and it's not used that much anymore. So now it's deprecated and ready for removal in the next release. So this was what was in this release, the Java 15 release, available in September. And there is a lot of things in this new release. I'm most excited about text blocks and foreign memory access API. Some of the things I think are not that useful, but perhaps you see a use case for those. If you see that I would use sealed classes or hidden classes for this, leave a comment in the comment section down below. If you are psyched for this new Java version, please leave me a comment about that as well. If you have any questions or suggestions, leave those down there as well. And if you like this video, give it a like, share it with your friends and colleagues. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do that. And I really hope to see you in the next video.